Okay, good afternoon, everyone. That worked well. Okay. My name's Lisa Auermuller. I am a member of the leadership team for the New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center, and I am the executive director of Rutgers Megalopolitan Coastal Transformation Hub with Bob. Today, along with my colleague Martha, who will be helping to facilitate your online questions, we will be moderating the panel on accelerating climate resilience across New Jersey within the changing federal landscape. I'm going to quickly introduce you to our speakers. So we have Dr. Bob Kopp from Rutgers University, Joshua Sachs from the Georgetown Climate Center, Rob Freudenberg from the Regional Plan Association, Matt Vonderhayden from Stafford Township, New Jersey, and then Dominique Hawkins is joining us remotely. Should we pull Dominique up? Great. Hi, Dominique. And then we have Nick Angerone from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. So our panel today is intended to focus on the resilient space and kind of taking stock. What progress have we had already? What could we have maybe done better? What could we have done differently? What important innovations have there already been? And are there exemplars in New Jersey that we can already point to? And then looking forward, what are policy gaps or next steps? We've asked each of our panelists to give only 5 minutes of a lightning opening remark, and then we're going to have some panel discussion, which I'll moderate, and then we're going to go to Martha to answer and address your questions. And I promised Marjorie I'd end at 3 o'clock for our full break, so we're going to stick to that. Okay, so I think we can get started. Bob, you're up first, and your 5 minutes starts now.
Great. Thank you all for sticking through us with the day so far. I'm going to talk a bunch about uncertainty, but Lisa wanted to make sure I started with what we know, so I'll do that. Everybody here in this room knows that climate change is harming us today. We know it through these extreme heat waves that we're seeing more frequently, through more extensive and more frequent wildfires, both those that we've had in New Jersey and those that have impacted our air quality here in New Jersey. And we know it on something that I spend a lot of my time working on, which is more intense flooding, coming from both a warmer, wetter atmosphere and from higher seas. And we also know that all of these problems are going to continue to get worse as long as humankind is putting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that some of them, including sea level rise, will continue to get worse even after we stop doing that. So therefore, we know we need to prepare today, not just for our current climate, but for our future climate. And how far into the future we need to prepare depends upon context, but when we're talking about housing, infrastructure, the built environment, that can be well into the future. For example, my house in Highland Park here and the North River tunnels are both over a century old. The North River tunnels were extensively damaged by Hurricane Sandy, as I'm sure all of you are aware, and we've had this very drawn-out process of building new tunnels due to the decisions of past governors, dealing with this infrastructure that's over 110 years old. So if we were to look at housing, infrastructure, and the built environment and only think about the next couple decades, we would be leaving a lot of risk within the lifetimes of those structures unaddressed. And just to go off my prepared remarks for a moment, listening to Senator Zwicker mention the budgeting process, and this is also getting well out of my lane, I would say that if the budgeting process is a barrier to the way we deal with long-term issues, that reform of the budgeting process might be something we want to think about. The way New Jersey does capital budgeting is not the only way that it's done. So we also know that climate change is a cross-cutting challenge. It's a scientific and environmental challenge, but it's also an economic and justice challenge. And so it's critical that when we think about climate adaptation, we not be having siloed discussions. Kate Zyla this morning talked about the importance of spatial master planning. That's a good example of a way we can bridge some of those barriers. But what we can't do is have one group of people over here talking about how to increase the resilience of our housing stock, while another group of people in a separate conversation is talking about how we expand housing supply to deal with the extreme shortage of housing that we have in this area. Lean too far in one direction, you run the risk of exacerbating that already severe housing market problems. But if you do it too much in the other direction, you put new housing and people in the way of deadly conditions. So that's all things we know. And at the same time, there's a lot that's uncertain. By the end of the century, New Jersey could be looking at 2 feet of sea level rise, or we could be looking at 5 feet. And some of that uncertainty comes from physics of the sort that I've studied for a long time, how much warming is produced by a certain amount of greenhouse gases, how strongly ice sheets respond to that, and some is to people, particularly on the uncertainty in our technology, emissions, and policy futures that determine how much we emit. But nonetheless, when we're talking about the built environment, we still need to deal with that uncertainty today. And so we need to build in ways of responding flexibly and dynamically as the climate evolves. So one way one goes about adaptation planning is to pick a single target, say sea level rise in the year 2100, and build that in as a metric. But again, if you pick that too high, you end up exacerbating costs, diverting money that could be used to make people better today. But if you pick it too low, you end up putting people in harm's way. Another approach, which the technical literature calls dynamic adaptive policy pathways, I know Marge specifically wanted me to name that, flips the question. So you look at a broad range of things you might do, beach replenishment, seawall construction, managed relocation, and identify what the conditions are under which each strategy works and when you would need to switch from one path to another. And then you develop an implementation and monitoring plan to ensure that you do actually make those switches as you go along. So work led by colleagues at Princeton shows that if you take a flexible approach like that, you can cut the cost of adaptation several-fold relative to an approach where you need to know now what you're planning for. But at the same time, these approaches can be complex. So you also have to think about how the lessons from that approach can be applied more broadly. One key lesson that comes out of this work is that it's often not a matter of how much, for instance, sea level is going to rise by 2100, but when sea level is going to rise by a given amount. It is certain that sea level in New Jersey is going to rise by 5 feet and that we will have to deal with it. But this could happen as soon as 2100, but it could also happen well into the 22nd century, and if we meet all our global climate goals, it could happen beyond that. So we need ways of capturing that risk and getting markets to recognize it so that we're not necessarily depending on following elaborate plans to get there. And so we can think about things like, well, can we get long in advance purchase agreements on houses that stick with a house? So say, okay, with this house can be sold until you get to 3 feet, and then Blue Acres is going to buy it, and we have several decades to invest the money so that we don't have to spend all that money up front. Tools like that. So to conclude, we've got to break down silos, recognizing that every pressing policy issue is touched by climate change. We have to recognize the many things we know for certain, while also planning for the broad ways in which the future might unfold. And flexible approaches can be really useful. And we have to creatively leverage markets in order to deal with that uncertainty so that we can avoid either pushing up costs too much now or putting people in harm's way.
Thank you, Bob. Josh, do you have a mic? Great.
I do.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joshua Sachs. I am the Climate Adaptation Director at the Georgetown Climate Center, where I look at state and federal climate adaptation policy. Before that, I served in the Commonwealth of Virginia and helped stand up a lot of their programs. So I come here today to New Jersey to bring a little bit of a bigger national perspective. And the first thing I will tell you all is there are many, many states that are doing really great things in the climate adaptation space. States that you might not even think of. Alabama has a really innovative roof latching program. North Carolina is using LIDAR to map their entire state for flooding. States are leading. New Jersey is one of those states that is leading. That's excellent. The problem is, even amongst the leader states, there's not enough money, there's not enough time, and there's not enough awareness. And you know, what I find troubling the most, I think we heard the senators talk about it at our last panel, is just not everyone is tuned in to all their risk. My family goes to the beach in Margate and Ventnor down South Jersey. No one's getting ready to do anything. They're just hoping that the storm won't happen. And similarly, if we look at what's happening right now with the federal government, obviously lots of rollbacks. But the thing that scares me the most is maybe getting not as much attention is very quietly, they've taken down all the future projections. So things that you might look at to assess your risk or a community might look at, those things are disappearing. That's all now landing on states to do. So we are in a tough time. We're in a time where state leadership is imperative, and states are doing great things. New Jersey is doing great things, but do not let that lull you into any sense of complacency. We are nowhere close to doing what really needs to be done. And I think everybody knows that there are a lot of people for whom they haven't moved, but the risk has moved to them. They bought a home they thought was safe that now isn't safe. This is a whole of society problem, and I wish I had a simple answer for you, but I don't. I just can tell you that we need to use the best science. We need to understand what's happening. We need to have a key government role, and we also need to take personal responsibility, because as much as we want the federal or state government to step in and help or rebuild our home or move us or everything, that's not what happens right now. So a lot to think about. This is a hard issue. I'm excited to hear what some of the localities in New Jersey are doing. Thank you.
Great. Rob, you're going to be up next. We're working on getting your slide up, but you're welcome to start.
Okay, I will use the pause to, if she hasn't already gotten recognition, I want to honor Marjorie Kaplan for the work she's done to put this conference together and all the work she's done to pull it off. Okay, so I'm with Regional Plan Association, and we spend a lot of time coming up with plans, but also looking at plans. And about a year and a half ago, we looked at a nationwide, a set of 64 resilience or adaptation plans to try and pull out what is the state of climate resilience planning and adaptation today. Some of these are from these lessons that I thought I would share. First one, and as we kind of could hear in just the way Bob Kopp was talking about, there's not necessarily agreement on what it means to be resilient or how to approach resilience. So are we talking about what? Resilience to coastal storms, resilience to sea level rise, resilience to heavy rain, resilience to heat, which often gets overlooked, resilience to the combination of all those things, and even emerging things like resilience to groundwater rise, which we're seeing in more and more municipalities as well. So there's not general agreement on that. There's not general agreement on kind of when we're planning to, as Bob mentioned. What you plan for 10 years from now with resilience is very different from what you'll plan for 100 years from now. When is the right time to come into that? How we measure resilience is really important. Kate Boycourt, who's here from EDF and RPA, worked together on developing a set of resilience indicators for New York City, and we're hoping to bring that to other places, including New Jersey. We don't have an agreed upon set of things that we're saying how we're doing, where we could be doing better, and that's critically important. So there's a lot we're missing. And then even resilient to what? What's the end game here? Do we want no flooding? Are we okay living with some water? Do we want just, to just kind of have flooding sometimes and be prepared to respond to a disaster and leave? Is that the cycle we want to be in? So there's so much we want to focus on in terms of what it means to be resilient. Second point is there's no one right way to adapt, but the right plan must have meaningful community engagement, input, co-creation to succeed. It shows up every time. If you plan for resilience without the community involved, it's not going to be a plan that the community backs, and there's going to be fighting all along the way. So community engagement is essential, and community members must be part of that solution. As I mentioned before, extreme heat, it needs greater prioritization as one of the things. We have flooded the zone with flooding, sorry. And we are thinking that extreme heat, in these plans that we looked at, only 17% of the resilience of the actions, the 2,000 actions that we analyzed had extreme heat as part of a resilience plan. This is, as we all know, the #1 killer of people every year, and we're not doing nearly enough to do it, and we can do it all together, right? We can mitigate flooding with things like trees and bioswales, which also reduce heat, right? We can kind of capture it all at the same time. Fourth lesson is that a really important one. Climate adaptation can be a viable pathway to building equity and economic resilience. We can take this opportunity to adapt our communities, to make them better communities and right the wrongs that we had. But on the other side of that, planning for equity and economic resilience can improve the adaptive capacity of communities. So if you're planning for better equity, better economic resilience, you're going to have more resilient communities. And the fifth lesson, which you've heard about a number of times today, is we don't yet know how to pay for adaptation in a way that will make our communities more resilient. We have a lot of great plans, we have a lot of ideas, and we don't have the money to do it. And there are a lot of great ideas for resilience out there. We heard Senator Smith talking about something he's going to put forward. Amy Chester's been putting a lot of work from Rebuild by Design. We're all talking about ways to fund adaptation. It's probably going to be one of the biggest investments, if not the biggest investments we make in our generation, the next generation. And we don't know how we're paying for it yet. And we probably just lost a big partner in DC for a lot of the things we want to do. So we really have to figure that out. Those are our lessons, and hopefully that sets the tone for some more conversation.
Okay, Matt, you get to go next. And you're going to give us the local perspective. And also let me know when you want to change slides.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Matt Von der Hayden. I'm the administrator, and I'm the director of water and sewer in Stafford Township. You know, the one thing, I think this is a great conference, because one of the things when I look around, I see all the different partners that I've been able to work with. But the one thing that I'd like to note, just from observing everything, is there's two things, especially for the younger people in this room. There's the politics of this, but there's also the administration and the professionals. So you're hearing a lot from the professionals. And each one of these professionals has an ethics, right, that they hold with what they do. There's nothing in the state of New Jersey where I can call Nick up and say, hey, I have an idea. Can we work together on that? DEP, to be able to sit down and have conversations. Hey, we've got an idea because this is what's going on at the community level. We've got the CRC in the room that does a lot of outreach. We've got Sustainable Jersey in the back that's promoting all those things. Marjorie, who set up a great conference, we worked together on a coastal vulnerability assessment. All these things start to line up. And in my mind, because I consider myself a professional, I don't look at politics. I don't think we've ever discussed politics. It's about how do we make the state and our communities better. And that's really what the focus of this should be. So I highlighted this slide. This is something that we've worked on with DEP, with Nick's help, to be able to come up with a plan in Stafford Township. One of the things that we talked about is how do we find funding, and we get scared because the funding goes away. To me, I don't get scared because as a professional and as a business administrator and leading the town, I know I'm going to find a way to make it happen, right? We're either going to work together to find a plan, we're going to work a way to find more money to do what's needed in the community to do it. And if you can highlight that for other communities in the state, they will find a way to do it as well. That's why getting together like this is important, because it keeps that positivity of where we go. Just looking at this map, there's a number of little dots up on that map, and some of the projects range from stormwater to bioswales to natural coastline, marsh restoration to flood elevations. So like, just to talk about a few, flood elevations. We've been able to obtain 4 flood elevation grants, what they call FMA grants, and that's with working with a partner in New Jersey OEM. Well, the fact that it's listed in this plan, the fact that I have it listed in this township and the county's hazard mitigation plan, that opens us up to that funding. That funding's not going to go away. I know that funding's going to be there year after year. So we get worried about these things. I think we also have to take a pause and realize there's certain things that can't be touched. So when you know that, that's what you focus on and that's what you go after. You know, there's restoration projects, there's planning. Part of the reason why you put the time into the planning is because the planning ultimately relays into the hard work that you do and you put out into the public. So even though that plan might not come to fruition in that day, you have to be able to look long-term and say what's going to happen from here. So we worked on a coastal vulnerability assessment years ago. I've been putting that into action, and we incorporated it into this Resilient Stafford plan. If you could go to the next slide, if you don't mind, Lisa, thank you. This is one of the projects I started in Stafford Township in 2019. And when I got there, the municipality had a number of issues. The person that was in my spot wasn't a professional, right? They were doing things that were out of line and not looking at what was right for the community. I had a sewer system that was failing. I had to go out and figure out how am I going to fix this. We went out and we picked the worst phase of the section and started to work with that. Then we started working with DEP. I started working with the Water Quality Division. I'm going to round out the scientists up here. So we got a physicist, we have we had somebody for fusion. I used to be a biologist and chemist before I got crazy and went into be administrator, right? So when I looked at this, I used to test water. And the reason why I looked at and said, hey, I'm going to be able to clean up the bay if I start to look at the infrastructure, because one of the municipal problems we have is our infrastructure is starting to fail. When I saw that, we started to work together with DEP and found funding to be able to do more sewer work. And we're one of the only municipalities in the state that's cleaned up a major waterway. It's over 186 acres of bay of water. And if you look on this map, you'll see a bunch of little red dots. That's fecal matter. So if you look where Stafford's at from the work that we've done, that's how these plans start to come to fruition, where you start to be able to link what is the infrastructure stuff that I'm working on today and day in, day out that eventually is going to pay off. And that's why you work on these planning processes.
Okay, we are going to go to Dominique online. Dominique?
Good afternoon, all.
Hi.
Hi, I'm going to share my screen while I talk. Thank you so much for having me. I am not a scientist. I am not a politician. I am not a policymaker. I am a preservation architect, a very strange joiner for this very important concept. So thank you for allowing me a few moments to speak. I do a lot of, as a preservation architect, I do a lot of work around climate in existing places. And the focus of my work is really keeping people in the place they love. And typically that's a historically designated place, and historic places tended to be built on water, which is how I got interested in talking about flooding and flood mitigation and how to make that work. But it starts from a people-oriented, people-centered approach of what is it about your place that is valuable to you, and how hard are you willing to work to save it, which is a conversation that I think can benefit the resilience direction that I've heard many of the speakers refer to. People who are impacted by climate change understand that there's climate change. I go to a lot of rooms and have a lot of conversations with people in different kinds of places. In the center of the screen is actually the map of Florida with lots of little dots. There are 18 of them. I went to 18 different communities and sat down with citizens and policymakers and folks in the community to understand what their resiliency challenges are, what they have done to try to mitigate those challenges, what they are hoping to get from the state, federal government in terms of helping them do it, and how they can better communicate with people what the issues are. There is also, and I've done a lot of work further down south, particularly in Charleston. I just did a really interesting project where they were looking at how to get resilience guidance information in the hands of people who were looking to improve existing, I didn't use the word historic, homes, so that they could stay in their homes as long as possible. People are understanding that the government is not going to necessarily step in and fix everything. They're not necessarily going to buy them out. This is particularly true in low wealth or vulnerable communities where FEMA is not going to invest the money, we just heard that from another speaker, to save them. And they're interested in staying in this place that matters to them. So how can they improve their circumstances in a way that allows them to be more comfortable and stay there longer? So we heard about planting a tree being a successful, resilience strategy to handle many different things. So breaking information down in terms of how people can implement improvements on their own properties allows them to feel that they have a stake in the game and can improve their own personal outcome. And if incrementally, if you get everyone to do something to improve stormwater on a block, then the overall stormwater in the city improves condition. So getting information into people's hands is critical. So my recommendation is to really, and it's been said by many speakers, is to get the people involved. they have many priorities and time is really a constraint for them. Clarify that everything that's happening is gonna take time. There's no silver bullet, it's not gonna be magically fixed tomorrow, and there are financial implications to it. And give people the information they need to make choices. And really state out loud that, that FEMA's not gonna come and fix it. And I think a lot of people are frustrated by that. So people-centered is a way to communicate and get the broadest audience to support the larger mission. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Nick, you get to round it out with your state perspective, and then we will open it up for a discussion.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I am your Chief Resilience Officer. You've heard this term referred to a couple times today. That is me. It's fun to hide in the back and just watch how that happens. Anyway, so my role as Chief Resilience Officer was established via Governor Murphy's executive order. Right, Executive Order 89 back in 2019. That executive order did a number of things, it established an interagency council on climate resilience, which I'm assuming the vast majority of you were not actually aware of. I am the vice chair of that group. There are 26 state agencies and departments that have met every month since December of 2019 on coordination and development of resilience policy in the state of New Jersey. Through that process, the state has developed a statewide climate change resilience strategy, which you heard Kate reference this morning, that really sets a policy framework for how state agencies and departments are going to incorporate climate resilience into their policymaking. There are 127 very diverse and different actions within that strategy. And it also uses a very broad definition of resilience, right? And you know, as people, some of us who've been working on this for over a decade now, in particular, right, we've had some disagreements on specific words to use and definitions. But for New Jersey, I think kind of a simple way to describe this, right, resilience, kind of in its pure definition, is to kind of bounce back to how you were before an event. Well, in New Jersey, we think about it as bouncing forward, right? We want to be more resilient and adapt to climate change so that we are less vulnerable to the climate impacts that we continue to see. We also recognized after we developed and released that strategy that we had a gap in that we were very focused on flooding, kind of to Rob's point. And so we spent about 18 months developing another policy document with specific actions by state agencies and departments, commitments by state agencies and departments, specifically around extreme and increasing heat, right? And so that extreme heat resilience action plan was released in the summer of last year. And we have spent kind of that time, since that time, certainly, but moving forward with implementation of that strategy and that resilience action plan. We will be releasing, probably next week at this point, an annual report for kind of all of the things that state agencies have done to implement climate resilience just in the past year. All right, and you'll see 17, 18 pages of examples as to things that we're doing. I also oversee the Office of Climate Resilience at the Department of Environmental Protection, which is great because it gives me staff to actually implement programs. And the programs that I implement, frankly, are not only foundational to the state's work, but are extremely successful programs. And again, you've heard some of them referenced today. So first, I oversee New Jersey's Blue Acres program, right? So this is a voluntary buyout program for residential properties that are flood prone. I don't want to say just those that have experienced flooding, because we are really trying to shift this to also incorporate kind of more forward-looking aspects. Blue Acres has acquired, since its inception, close to 1,200 properties, which one is amazing, but two, it's kind of a small number when you think about the number of properties that we have that are vulnerable to flooding. And so it is critically important to the people who have been impacted and who will be impacted by flooding. And the reason Blue Acres is, I think, so successful is because of the customer service that the staff provides, and they are amazing, phenomenal people. But it's only going to be a small piece of the really, really big challenges that we face around flooding in New Jersey. The second program I oversee is New Jersey's Coastal Management Program, and that is a cooperative program, not only kind of with programs and offices within the department, but also with NOAA. And one of the benefits of that is there has been, for 45 straight years, a stable source of funding coming into the department to not only just support kind of broad coastal management and the staff that does the permitting, but without that funding, we would not have the foundational documents and strategies and plans that we do in New Jersey. And it's been critical, that partnership with NOAA has been critical, and it's one of the many impacts of the potential of the Michigas in DC right now, of where kind of we expect to see those impacts. So just real quick, the slide up here, I'm not going to go through this. You can use the QR code. It'll lead you to an online link of this. Every one of those bullets is a program, project, or link that we have implemented in recent years that is just intended to show you kind of the many aspects of activities around climate resilience in New Jersey.
Thank you. Can we bring Dominique back up? And I'm going to join all of you for conversation. We are ahead of schedule, which is amazing. Thank you. Okay, good, it's on. So our first question I'm going to ask each of you, a little bit is about looking back, but then also taking what we've learned and what we've done so far and thinking about how we can use it going forward. So Dominique, I'm going to start with you. What has been most surprising to you as you've watched the practice of climate resilience evolve over the past decade, and how can that inform our future ability to address it?
I think people are more willing to speak about it, and people are accepting the fact that on the ground it's real. When I started having these conversations, and I literally started a decade ago, it was 2015. When I started having these conversations and I would start speaking with people, oh, it's not really our problem, we don't live on the shore. And the shore could be along the creek, river, stream, or ocean. It's not our problem, it's theirs. I think there's a much greater understanding or acceptance that it's a lot more of our problems than it used to be. There are deniers, and I have worked in Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina, so trust me, there are deniers, and I still change my speech patterns depending on what state I'm in terms of, is it really sea level rise or is it storm surge? You use the words that people accept. But overall, I think there is a greater appreciation that it's real, and there's a desperate desire for people to do something for themselves because they're not seeing the government coming in to rescue them.
Thanks, Dominique. Who else wants to share what surprised them and what we can learn from it?
I'm always happy to chime in. When our elected officials and candidates talk about climate change, the conversation typically starts with and I think right now in particular, right, climate change, whatever your opinion of it is, and climate change is real, it's happening, it's having direct impacts on people, we're seeing increasing heat, we're seeing increasing flooding, and then they immediately shift to greenhouse gas mitigation. We really don't talk about what we're going to do about the impacts that people are seeing now and how those impacts are going to continue to increase going forward. When Lisa can't get her kid to school on time because the road is flooded, that's a cost to people. When you lose your insurance policy because you're within 3 miles of the coast, and this is happening in New Jersey, that is a cost to you. When the Asbury Park Beer Garden closes, breaks my heart. Like that's, right, that's not just a cost, that's a cost to business, that's a cost to people, that's a cost to your community. When your water rates are going up because they're trying to plan to deal with harmful algal blooms and other contaminants, that's a cost to you, right? When businesses see less foot traffic on extremely hot days, that is a cost to our economy. And I think we are really missing an opportunity, our elected officials and our candidates, to talk about climate resilience is an affordability issue, right? We heard that term over and over and over and over today, and right, that's what we heard over and over and over the last 2 years, 3 years, affordability issues, but we're not talking about what the actual costs of these impacts are to people. I think it's a huge missed opportunity.
So what can we learn from that?
Talk about it.
Talk about it.
Talk about it in that sense. And I'm not going to go into what we actually do about it, but let's hear the proposals for what we actually do about it.
Matt, you look ready to go.
Yeah, to me, I think
then I'll go to you,
exactly
Josh.
the example that I showed, I think shows Nick's point. When I looked at that sewer project and said, hey, this is something that needs to happen from an infrastructure standpoint, part of the way I look at relaying that back to the governing body and getting the governing body to go back in and say, hey, we're going to put the money into doing this, is that, hey, where would you rather live? Would you rather live on a coastal bayfront that has fecal matter in it? That's an economic incentive, right? Part of what I looked at when I was looking at that sewer, I had in the back of my mind is we have to replace the sewer. At the time, I'm also the certified floodplain manager for the township. We had 15 homes and I started in 2019. So 7 years after Hurricane Sandy, there were still 1,500 homes in Stafford Township that needed to be raised. I was like, people weren't educated on what the programs were out there. We started to do education programs. Since we've received 5 FMA applications and helped 50 people raise their homes, and through that education, we've gotten that number down to 700. I think in 6 years, that's pretty, that's really good to get it down to 700. But that's the point that Nick's making. In my mind, I'm setting that longer-term goal of if I replace the sewer system, if I replace the water system that's underneath the road, and I'm helping the people in the meantime to raise their home, well, what can I do if I've accomplished more than half of that list in 6 years? If I got another 6 years that I can help the rest of those folks get their homes up, what can I do next? I can raise the road. And if you don't set those plans in place and start to work on them, you never get there. So I think, to your point, that's the economic benefit, is you're selling like, hey, the resiliency part is you want to live here. The municipalities and the people that are in functions, they need to be working with the states, the nonprofits, to be able to go out there and start to put these plans into fruition.
Josh, you're next, and then Bob, you look ready to go.
So one of the things we say in climate adaptation, one of our principles is mitigate at the community scale, mitigate at the regional scale. Let's not go home by home and try to put everyone on stilts or things like that. And let's read the risk when we look at things like the California wildfires. Over 90% of the homes were rated as high fire risk. And what surprises me is rather than people wanting to take action, they want government to fix it for them so they can stay where they are in most cases. I bet Nick can tell us stories that for every buyout Blue Acres does, there's a person or two who don't want to go. 4, okay?
Four more that want to go that we can't fund.
Right, but also people who probably resist it pretty hard, right? And that limits our ability to mitigate on the community scale and deal with the whole area. So that's what surprises me most, is how hard it is to get people to not only accept their risk, but want to take action that is going to change their lives. And I know that's so personal and so hard, but the more I do this work, the more it's so hard. I'm surprised at how hard it is.
I think part of that, by going out and doing, part of what you have to do when you're leading a community is go out and talk to your public. Your point is well taken, because I think usually what happens is these are folks that have lived in homes for, their entire lives, 60, 70 years. There's a personal commitment to that home. Not only that, but if they lived in the home that long, typically they're seniors. And then they go, well, what am I supposed to do? And there's that personal part to it that, when you're working with folks, you have to, look at it from a standpoint of can we elevate, or is this appropriate that we need to get out of this area?
Okay, I'm going to go to Bob and then Rob.
Yeah, I think just two things. I think just emphasize stuff that's already said. One, what Nick said about affordability. I mean, look, I'm a climate scientist. I want to start with climate first, but that's not what's on people's minds first. And so if we're talking about housing affordability with climate being a lens, well, we have to solve these problems together, as I said. So I think that's very important. The other thing, and again, I guess it could be something that surprised me, but it's also something that in retrospect, we know is the important role of what the social science literature calls focusing events in getting things to move, right? So Hurricane Sandy was a big focusing event for New Jersey, right? So for several years, all everybody thought about with respect to climate adaptation was coastal flooding, right? And then we have Hurricane Ida, and so people, more and things like that, and more attention on rain-driven flooding. And we have air quality issues associated with California wildfire or Canadian wildfires, so more attention on that. But like the focusing events create policy windows, but we need to know what to do with those policy windows, right? Hurricane Sandy was really an opportunity, and I'd say Marjorie and Jean, I don't know where Jean went. Marjorie and Jean really, with the New Jersey Climate Change Alliance, really leveraged that policy window, I think, quite a lot to advance sort of climate-informed or science-informed decision-making in the state, leading to eventually to the establishment of the Climate Change Resource Center. But like knowing what you do when you finally have an event that draws people's attention to an issue that is growing over time is critical. I think we've seen several instances of that in New Jersey over the last 15 years.
Okay, Rob, what surprised you and what can we learn from it?
I think what's, it's a few folks have said it, but what surprised me is how well we've done at kind of understanding the risk and knowing where these issues are going to be a problem. When I started in this field 20 years ago, storms were like, oh, this could happen, and then it did happen. And then the models that we've developed since, I'll say Bob Cobb's model and sea level rise, right? These are amazing models. We know where the problems are. We know at some point, we know what the solutions are too. So we've done a tremendous job of understanding what the risk is, what we can do about it. But on top of that, it surprises me how little we've done to do anything with that information. We have a lot of great plans, and we have a lot of initial projects and pilot projects, but we're still largely at the pilot project level of this, and that's in a way unacceptable. I'm surprised that there's not more Stafford townships, right? I'm surprised that more people aren't getting the message and carrying this through and finding the funding that's available. And I think just to call out, so part of the problem here is we saw the New Jersey Real Rule come out, right? A forward-looking rule, the kind of thing we need to do, the change we need to make so that we're not putting more people at risk in the future. And we saw the same predictable response to that from those in communities or from developers, from those who want to keep building at all costs. And that too is unacceptable. That still surprises me that knowing the degree of risk that we face, knowing the future that these communities face, that there would still be backlash to what is seemingly common sense, but it's taking a leap forward. And we have to work with the fact that adaptation is change, and people don't like change. And that's our biggest challenge, I think, in facing this, is that we all just want to live the life we want to live and be comfortable, but we have to make changes if we want to not face the risks that climate is bringing.
Okay, before we go to the next question, Dominique, go for it.
It's very strange to be hovering in this room. So I had an amazingly eye-opening experience in 2009. It was just about 5 years after Katrina, and I was, and there were lots of plans developed immediately following Katrina. I was in New Orleans working on a project for the city as a whole, and was spending a lot of time in the Lower Ninth. And there was a planning firm from Philadelphia that said,
Thank you, Dominique. Before I go to the next question, I'm going to remind you all that if you want to be part of the conversation, scan the QR code. It will send your question to Martha, and then in 10 minutes, we're opening it up to your questions. So I'm going to go in the order that you all gave your 5-minute talk, just so you know what order we're going in. And this is my question. What would be your top 1 or 2 priorities that New Jersey needs to do to become more resilient? Bob, you get to go first.
I sort of want to hear what the people with more practical experience want to do, but I will talk anyways.
You have good experience.
They have to actually have to manage the trade-offs, right? And I think we need to get at what Dominique was saying. I think we need to think systematically about having more participatory planning in communities around the state that are grounded in scientific facts, but also all the other values that are at stake. And so I don't know exactly what's the best way of getting that going is in the places where people don't feel like they've adequately engaged in resilience planning processes so far, but I think that's, we aren't going to solve these trade-off issues if people don't feel like they're bought into the planning process. I'll let you all solve how to actually do that.
Josh, go ahead.
I'll give you a couple quick things. First, New Jersey needs to create or find a way to have a dedicated funding source. Relying on the federal government right now, relying on the federal government is not ideal. Other states have created resilience-specific funds and found ways to fund them. So that's one thing. And then it's not enough to just have money. You need to spend it wisely, and that takes spatial master planning and a recognition that that's an engineering challenge, first and foremost. You need engineers to do that. It's not about speculating a green or living shoreline here, or a little bump up here, or let's protect a wetland. These are major challenges we're facing nowadays, and you need engineering. So funding, planning, engineering.
Thank you. Rob.
Well, the funding and spatial planning were on my list as well, so I'll take.
Sorry.
I'll choose a couple more. One is we need to codify Nick's job, and maybe we can codify Nick into the job. That'd be nice. We need to make sure that good ideas from this administration don't go away with the next administration. As we heard before, that's a risk, and having a chief resilience officer, having someone whose job it is, having an office there focused on this critical issue is absolutely a necessity, and that's a no-brainer legislation that should happen. I'll also say, and this is maybe a little tricky, maybe controversial, but our shore, the New Jersey shore, is, some say, responsible for tens of billions, 30 billion in revenue. And it is an endangered species as we know it today. And we're not thinking about that. And I think maybe if we're looking ahead to the next governor, we have to figure out what a transition for the shore looks like. How do we make sure that this iconic place that we all love, that means so much to people beyond New Jersey too, is something that we can still have in the future? But we have to shift away from the model that we have today, because it's really kind of entrenching the interest of just rebuild at any cost, and we rely on the shore for revenue. And so we have to start thinking of new models for what does a shore economy look like in the age of climate change. And if we codify Nick's job, I know he'll figure that out.
Okay, Matt, and then we'll go to Dominique and then finish with Nick.
I think 2 things. I think I mentioned it earlier. I think you need to make sure, and we need to put professionals in the job. Like right now, there's 6 credentialed managers in the state of New Jersey. We have over 560 municipalities. The other thing I think is we're looking at opportunities here, right, where like Resilient Stafford, I'll use that because Stafford has gone through that process. That process is out there and other municipalities can participate in it. It's like, and I'll point back to the folks at Sustainable Jersey. One of the things how Sustainable Jersey started to build up was the first people the first municipalities that went in there, they started to do good work, started to get certified, and then people within other municipalities said, well, hey, why is our town not certified? I think something similar needs to happen where you start to highlight the municipalities that are doing the work, and then that's going to help some of the other municipalities come along, because the community members are going to say, well, hey, why do they have a clean waterway Hey, why is their infrastructure improved? Hey, why are they getting more for their homes? That's going to help to push the narrative to start to see more of this work happen.
Okay, Dominique.
So that's very similar to something I was going to offer. So part of that, those discussions with those 18 municipalities in Florida was pulling together their solutions into a single source of, what they did, how it worked, good, bad, or otherwise, the resources and where they got them, into a single source, so that could become a model for other municipalities of the same size or who are facing similar issues. But I will again come back to you need municipal support, and that also involves the citizens. And citizens come in many stripes. People are different. So I've literally worked in environmental justice communities talking about climate change, and and I'll say sip tea with old ladies talking about climate change. You have to meet people where they are and be able to communicate with them in a way that's real to them and within the bandwidth that they can accept. And whether or not that's developing a series of like online tools and resources, video webinar, things that show up on YouTube that can go out, but something that can really get messages out. Everyone shouldn't have to invent this stuff. But I think it's critical to make this part of the education and literally in the schools kind of education if you want it to be part of the statewide discussion.
Thanks. Nick, what are your priorities?
All right, I'm going to add two things just onto the kind of funding question, and then I'll give you another one. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce issued a report last year that estimates that the return on investment for emergency preparedness and resilience is $13 for every one spent. NOAA has a more recent report that in coastal counties, that's 14 to 1. If I offered you guys an investment opportunity at those returns, you'd jump on in a second. Why are we not doing this? The other reason we need a dedicated, stable state funding source for this work is sort of regardless, again, of kind of what's happening at the federal level right now and whether there is funding. The funding that we get from the feds takes way too damn long to put into implementation, right? We are over 3 years after the remnants of Tropical Storm Ida impacted New Jersey, and through the Blue Acres program, right, we've brought in about $100 million to do buyouts. We still don't have approvals from FEMA and HUD to go and do those buyouts. Using state funds, the small amount that we get from the corporate business tax through the Garden State Preservation Trust, we can do those buyouts in 6 to 9 months. We can't rely on the feds, right? Again, regardless of the nonsense. We need to do this. We need to invest as a state. The other thing I want to say, we have to stop thinking about this solely in response to disasters, right? The immediate response to a disaster is to get people back in their homes, businesses open as quickly as possible. That is not the time when we need to start thinking about, right, to Dr. Kopp's point, how do we now react to this? We also don't want to wait until there's been the death and destruction to then decide that we're going to make these investments, right? And I appreciate the comment from Senator Smith, right? I forget exactly how he referred to it, right? We need a fund so when there's a disaster, $300 million fund, $1 billion fund, whatever he said, for when there's a disaster. Well, let's put that money up front and make it less likely that we are going to see those impacts, right? Make that investment up front. Stop focusing on just the disaster response. Start planning for long-term impacts. That means doing the geographic plan, the geospatial plan, right? That means potentially identifying, I know I'm not supposed to say this, right? The areas that we shouldn't invest anymore, or we're not going to be able to support going forward. These are difficult conversations. The easy conversations are gone. They're done, guys. We're past that. We have to have these difficult conversations. We have to have make those difficult decisions to make the state more resilient.
Okay, thank you. Martha, what are our friends in the audience thinking about?
A whole lot of things.
Okay.
So let's start out with addressing climate changes is good government. But how do we get 564 towns to understand this? And then at more of a local level, and that would then be kind of, I guess, addressed to Matt, how do you engage your citizenry in this process?
Matt's good at that.
Yeah, I go out. I have a lot of workshops. So what I do is when we go out every year, I do at least 2 or 3 what I call flood mitigation assistance workshops, where I go out and I send. There's repetitive. So we get into the governmental nomenclature. So RL, SRL, and SD properties, repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss, and SD substantially damaged. I send letters out to all those folks, and I invite them into town hall, and we do workshops with them to notify them of the yearly flood mitigation assistance application we put in. But it's about going out and meeting with your civic associations, meeting with the people, understanding what the issues are. When I first started in Stafford, there were some of the folks like the Office of Planning and Advocacies here. I started and I had a vehicle floating down the road that was on the other side of the parkway. If you're not familiar with Stafford, it's very large. It's 57 square miles, and this is in a section where it wasn't even near the bay. I had a police car floating down the vehicle, down the road, and an officer sends it to me, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going out to the bay today. And no, it was on the inland. Nobody had addressed stormwater issues. So the former administrator and the former mayor, they let it go to the wayside. We didn't have plans in place. You know, part of the thing with the plans, I totally agree. I'm big on doing the plan and then taking it and working the plan. But I try to think of myself as the football coach. If it looks like I'm losing, I start changing the plans up so that I can make sure that I'm, moving the township in the right direction. That's what you have to do. If it's not working, you're working with your community. If I got a car floating down the road, we're obviously doing something wrong because there's no, it's not working.
Who else wants to say something? Oh, okay, we got Rob and then Josh.
Okay, so maybe it's adding on to the question, maybe asking Matt to talk more, but that is great how much you've done in your town, and I'm wondering, we are 564 municipalities, right? Are you talking to other towns too, to share the lessons? Because I feel like unless other communities know what's possible and what you're doing and how it gets done, they can stay entrenched, and all the communities are going to need to do this eventually. There's no real borders between land. So that's both an answer. We need to have regional approaches here, and I guess further question for Matt.
I guess the way I do it is, like, we work together. That's why I'm here today. Marjorie reached out. Nick's asked in the past if anybody wants to talk with us, I'm happy to talk with anybody. The other thing is so Stafford Township's in Ocean County. I've been there 6 years. About 4 years ago, I started something called the Ocean County Administrators, and we do a Zoom meeting where every 3-4 months we get everybody together, and I'll point things out that we've done and said, hey, you can take advantage of these things. There's any opportunity where you can go out and interact to try to show, like, hey, this is how we do this. I'm happy to do that. It's a matter of, you also have to remember those administrators and those people that actually do the work, they answer to the mayors, the governing bodies. They have to be willing to do that. That's why when you go out, part of my rationale is, hey, it's the extra time to put in to do all this work. So I work on, when I get done this workshop, I'm going to drive back to work and work another 6 hours tonight, because that's what you have to do the more that you need to do for your community.
Josh, what are you thinking about?
I've got a hard one and a harder one. So most communities, most states are under-resourced in this space, and I don't just mean money to help pay for a relocation or a flood wall or something. I mean the most basic, having a certified floodplain manager and having enough staff who can figure out, how flashy your rain is going to be and what to do about it, all those sorts of things. So it's not just talking to the people, it's helping the localities stand up the staff they need. This is a newer problem. Localities have police forces and emergency managers. Positions like NICS are pretty new. Pretty much all of them that exist in the country have happened since 2018. So we need to help communities get the capacity. And here's the even harder one. Sometimes in the United States, there are laws that make us do things we might not want to do, but they make us safer. Seatbelt laws, helmet laws. Setbacks are part of this. Minimum flooding ordinances, how high your freeboard has to be. These are all part of it too. And while we need to listen to the community, there's also a leadership role for government to put in place standards that are going to help protect people.
Bob, you look ready.
So I actually want to have two questions for anybody else to react to. Because this is a governance question. I think there's two things that related to governance broadly that seem relevant here. So one, we don't have enough chief resilience officers. Fine, most states of our size would not need 564 chief resilience officers. And so thoughts of, well, is our extreme home rule decentralization, is that working against us here, and is there a way we can respond to it? The second, Nick has mentioned a few times, there are lots of things we can do that have very high positive returns on investment, yet we can't do it because we can't get the upfront funds. And are there ways we could think about our budgeting system that might help us? I don't think we can do the magical thing Congress is trying to do of just measuring everything with respect to our current policy baseline, but are there ways we could be better positioned to get those returns on investment through changes in how we do budgeting? So if anybody wants to respond to either of those.
Just quick on the governance thing. I do think climate change and flooding is going to put continued pressure on the home rule-ness of things, right? You even see in the mitigation side, offshore wind and the need to site infrastructure has eroded home rule a bit, whereas the state passed a law where they can overrule the local community. Is that going to happen with adaptation? Will it become easier for some communities to receive communities that are bought out or are flooding or are fleeing if they combine as one community? I think it's going to start to put that into question and maybe start to erode the amount of home rule there is.
Nick, you looked like you were.
I'm not touching home rule at all. I'm not touching that at all.
Can I offer?
Yes, please.
So one of the things that I encountered in Florida is that they actually have 5 water management districts across the entire state. And their management districts aren't really as much about flooding, but really about managing natural resources in terms of making sure water gets to the places it needs to. But looking at this as a regional basis, the local governments could sort of plug into their regional district to get information, and whether or not you need 546 floodplain managers, this may be a way to at least thinking regionally in that way, a way to bridge the problem.
Let me add a few things, not at all about home rule. So one, right, I hope one thing that everybody's taking away today, right, is that this is an all-of-government approach, needs to be an all-government approach, but also, right, we need collaboration across all of our organizations, right, academic organizations, NGOs, CBOs, and for those of you who aren't already involved, the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative is a great way to do that, whether you're at a local level, whether you're a practitioner, whether you're a researcher. It's a great group that should be statewide, not just coastal. They can yell at me at the board meeting. We also, again, I really appreciate the comment about doing this on a regional scale. I think Rob and I probably have a different definition of regional from kind of, we run the Resilient NJ program, which the commissioner mentioned, and that is we provide support to groups of municipalities, regions of municipalities, to do kind of that regional planning. First, we do all of the modeling on a watershed basis, and then drill down into that kind of multi-municipal regional planning. And kind of touch on a couple other points that have been mentioned here today. Right, that is we provide the support. We deal with all of the unpleasantness that is federal funding and paperwork. We hire the contractors. We go through 2 years of hiring contractors with the Department of Treasury. We provide that support to the communities, and the community, and I'm not the elected officials, the communities are the ones who are informing those plans, right? And so through that program, we've done 4 multi-municipal regions. We also worked with some individual towns, such as Stafford. Overall, about 40 municipalities. We only have 524 to go. But it also, as a kind of demonstration that kind of good planning results in implementation, those plans have brought in over $26 million in federal implementation funds, right? These are not giant seawalls, Army Corps scale projects, but they're projects that have a direct impact on the communities, on people's lives. And it's that type of work, right, that type of planning that we want to continue to invest in. I'm a planner. I think planning is critically important. To some extent, I think it's fun. But if we work on those plans for 2 years and then they go on the proverbial shelf, it's been a waste of time. And so, right, watching these plans, the actions in these plans get developed with, again, continued support from the department and our consultants, and bring in those federal funds, as well as, they're developing specific actions, without the federal funds that are based in those plans, right? I consider Resilient NJ a massive success, and it's something that we need to, continue to be able to invest in.
Okay, that is actually all we have time for. It is 3 o'clock. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing with us. Dominique, thank you for sharing with us remotely.